did your petty sibling rivalry expose your family's darkest secret? Growing up, my brother Cian and I were like Tom and Jerry. We had beef on sight. If I saw him walking into the kitchen, I'd run at him with a knife. If he saw me brushing my teeth, he'd grab Dad's golf club and hit my head. We fought over everything. The TV remote, the first slice of pizza. We even fought over who hated each other more. Full-on fistfights that ended with Mom screaming and regular ambulance rides. We couldn't stand each other until we hit our late teens and decided to do MMA together. We had no idea it would one day destroy our family. The first time we sparred, he knocked me out. I threw him a pair of gloves that night and told him to put them on. We both went to school with black eyes the next day. Soon we were pushing each other to get better, going to the MMA gym together, and somewhere along the way became best friends. Wherever he went, I went. If you messed with me, you messed with him. 12 years later, we had our black belts. We were training at the gym one day when we heard buzzing coming from Cian's bag. He walked over, checked his phone, and saw 2 missed calls from Mom. His eyes burst open. Mom's golden rule was she never called twice, unless someone died or was about to. He called back immediately. His expression changed from confused to terrified in seconds. We need to go. Now. He grabbed his stuff and ran for the door. I followed without asking. We rushed to the hospital. The whole drive, Cian wouldn't tell me what Mom said. Just kept saying, hurry up. When we got to her room, I wasn't ready for what I saw. Mom was in the hospital bed with a broken nose and her face purple and swollen. She looked like she'd been in a car crash. What happened? Cian asked, his voice shaking. Mom started crying. Someone broke into the house. 2 men. They beat me up. Cian's face turned to rage in seconds while I took Mom's hand. The men didn't take anything, Mom continued. Not my purse, not the TV, nothing. It's like they broke in to hurt me. My mind started racing. Who would do that? And why? Mom read our minds at that moment. Maybe you can see who it was from the security video. She pointed to the phone in her jacket pocket. You see, Mom had CCTV cameras installed in her house because she was terrified of break-ins. Cian and I grabbed her phone and watched the security video together. 2 men with masks picked her lock, walked in and went straight for her. Didn't even look at valuables. They tackled her and hit her repeatedly. It was gruesome to watch and we almost cried. Their entire bodies were covered in black clothing. But when one of them reached up, his neck was visible for just a second. There was a tattoo there. A really distinct one. I stared at it closer. Wait, I know that tattoo. What? Cian looked at me. That's Dad's friend, Jason. He has that exact tattoo on his neck. Cian's eyes bugged out like they do before his matches. You see, 5 years ago, Dad's coworker accused our mom of cheating because she wanted Dad for herself. She showed him screenshots proving Mom was unfaithful. He believed it without talking to her. I remember he was so angry when he left. So hateful. Do you think Dad did this? I asked quietly. Do you think he had Jason attack Mom? Should we tell the cops? We sat in silence for a long time. Then Cian said something that changed everything. We're not going to the cops. What? Cian snarled. They'll get a trial and 6 months probation. Maybe. That's not real justice. We'll handle this ourselves. I looked at Mom's swollen face and nodded. What do we do? We find out who did it. Then we make it right. For the next 13 months, we became investigators. We asked around about Jason. We followed him, watched where he went, who he talked to. The whole time, we trained harder than we ever had. Every punch we threw was for Mom. Every hour spent tracking brought us closer to the truth. The more we dug, the more everything pointed to Jason. He was Dad's best friend. His coworkers saw a black outfit in his bag the day Mom was attacked. He suddenly had a new car and his mortgage paid off. Dad used to have this thing where he paid people for favors in the past. When we decided it was him, we knew what to do. We picked a Friday night when Jason left his usual strip club. We waited in the parking lot. When he walked out, we stepped in front. I didn't say anything, just stared with my baseball bat in hand. Cian cracked his knuckles. Jason looked at us, at our hands, then back at our faces. Get in the car. Jason got in. We drove to Dad's house. We'd been watching him too. We knew he was home alone. When we knocked, Dad opened the door and his reaction was priceless. We pushed past him into the house. Jason tried to back away, but we blocked him. Tell us what you did to Mom, I said. I don't know what you're talking about, Jason stammered. Cian punched Jason with the strength of 13 years of training and rage. He fell to the floor. We have video. We saw your tattoo. Dad stepped between us. Stop. Please stop. Did you tell him to do it? I asked Dad. Did you have Jason beat up Mom? No. Dad looked panicked. I didn't do anything. Cian got in Dad's face. Then who was the other person with you? Who else attacked our mom? Dad's face crumbled as he cowered. It wasn't me. I swear it wasn't me. Then who? Cian was yelling now. Dad sank into the wall. His voice came out broken. It was my son. My other son. From before I met your mother. You don't know about him. He's 32. The room went silent. Dad had another son. A son who beat our mom half to death. Cian and I looked at each other and gave that subtle nod that meant it was time to handle business. I grabbed Dad by the collar and yanked him forward until our faces are inches apart. His breath smells like fear and cheap whiskey. Cian moves fast, positioning himself between us and the front door so Jason can't make a run for it. Dad's hands shake as words tumble out of his mouth, saying his other son's name is Casper, that he's been supporting him for years without telling anyone. He claims Casper needed money and Dad told him about valuables in Mom's house. The lie is so bad it makes my blood feel like it's boiling. I shove Dad backward hard and he stumbles against the wall. Nothing was taken from Mom's house, not her purse or TV or jewelry, because this wasn't about robbery. This was about hurting her. Cian walks over to where I dropped my baseball bat and picks it up slowly, letting Dad see every movement. Dad's eyes go wide and he starts talking faster, giving us an address across town, begging us not to hurt Casper. He keeps saying Casper is just a kid who made a mistake. I laugh and it comes out bitter and angry because Casper is 32 years old, older than both of us, and he beat our mother until her face looked like raw meat. We head for the door, and I turn back to look at Dad and Jason still on the floor. If either of them calls Casper or the cops before we're done, we'll come back and finish what we started tonight. The drive to Casper's place takes 20 minutes, and neither Cian nor I say a single word. My hands squeeze the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turn white, and I can feel the leather creaking under my grip. Cian's breathing gets heavier and heavier like it always does right before a match. We're about to cross a line we can never come back from, but I keep seeing Mom's broken nose and swollen face in my mind. The address Dad gave us leads to a rundown apartment building with half the security lights broken and graffiti covering the walls. We park across the street and watch the third-floor window Dad said was Casper's. Around midnight, we see movement inside, a shadow passing by the window. Cian suggests we wait until morning when Casper leaves for work, somewhere public where we can grab him without neighbors hearing and calling the police. Every part of me wants to go up there right now and kick down his door, but Cian's right. We spent 13 months being smart about this, tracking Jason and gathering evidence. Rushing in angry now is how we get caught or hurt or worse. We drive to an all-night diner and slide into a corner booth. The waitress brings us coffee, and we sit there writing down everything Dad told us about Casper on napkins. His name, his age, his address, the fact that Dad paid him to do this. At 3 in the morning, my phone starts buzzing and Mom's name lights up the screen. My stomach drops because she never calls this late. I answer and hear her crying, asking where we are, saying she woke up from a nightmare about us getting hurt. I lie and tell her we're at Cian's apartment watching movies and eating pizza. She doesn't sound like she believes me, but she tells us to be careful and hangs up. We go back to Casper's building at 6 in the morning and park in the same spot. At 6:30, Casper comes out wearing a brown delivery truck uniform with a company logo on the chest. Cian takes photos of his license plate and the truck logo with his phone. We follow him to a big warehouse on the edge of town and watch him clock in through the front entrance. Now we know his schedule and where he works. Over the next week, we track Casper exactly like we track Jason. He works 10-hour shifts 5 days a week, stops at the same convenience store every night to buy beer and goes straight home. His apartment is always dark by 10. He lives alone with no girlfriend or roommate that we can see. Cian finds Casper's social media accounts, and we spend hours going through his photos. There are pictures of him with Dad from years ago at barbecues and baseball games. Family gatherings we were never invited to. Birthday parties where Dad is smiling and hugging Casper like he's proud of him. A whole secret life Dad kept hidden from us and Mom. The photos make me feel sick because Dad chose this son over us. He paid him to hurt Mom and never once mentioned having another kid in all the years we were growing up. Cian finds posts from Casper complaining about money problems and child support payments he can't afford. This gives us more pieces of why Dad picked him. Dad probably promised Casper enough cash to solve all his financial troubles in exchange for scaring Mom. I scroll through more of Casper's social media and find photos from 3 years ago showing him at a kid's birthday party with a little girl. The caption says, "Best day with my princess," and there are dozens of comments about how he's such a good dad. I show Cian and he zooms in on Casper's face in the photo. He looks happy and normal, not like someone who would beat a woman half to death for money. But then Cian scrolls to posts from 6 months ago where Casper is complaining about his ex-wife taking him back to court for unpaid child support. He writes about how he might lose custody if he can't catch up on payments. One post says he owes over $20,000 and his wages are getting garnished. Another post from 2 months ago says he's desperate and needs a miracle. Dad must have seen these posts and knew exactly how to manipulate Casper into doing what he wanted. I feel sick thinking about how Dad used Casper's love for his daughter as leverage to get him to hurt Mom. Cian and I sit in his car outside Casper's apartment building and talk through our options for 3 straight days. I keep saying we should just go to the cops with everything we know, show them the security footage, tell them about Jason's new car and paid-off mortgage, explain how Dad has a history of paying people for favors. But Cian shakes his head every time and reminds me that Dad will hire an expensive lawyer who will tear apart our investigation. Jason will claim the money came from somewhere else and that his tattoo is common. Casper will say he was at work when Mom got attacked and his employer might back him up. Dad will cry in court about how his sons are trying to frame him because they're angry about the divorce that never happened. The prosecutor will look at our surveillance photos and recordings and say we conducted an illegal investigation that violated privacy laws. Everything we worked for over 13 months will get thrown out, and those 3 will walk free. I know Cian is right, but it makes me want to punch something. We need hard evidence that can't be explained away or dismissed. We need Casper to confess on record, or we need to catch Dad paying him. I suggest we record Casper admitting what he did, and Cian's eyes light up like he does when he figures out an opponent's weakness. We drive to an electronics store and buy a small voice recorder that fits in a pocket. Back at Cian's apartment, we practice what we'll say to Casper to get him talking. Cian will show him the security footage, and I'll tell him we know Dad paid him. We'll act like we already have proof and see if Casper panics and starts explaining. The key is to approach him somewhere public so he can't run or fight back, and to stay calm so he doesn't realize we're recording. We spend hours rehearsing different scenarios and responses until we have it down. For the next 2 weeks, we keep following Casper and learning his routine. Every Friday night, he goes to the same bar called Lucky's on the east side of town. It's a dive place with sticky floors and a pool table in the back corner. The lighting is dim, and the music is loud enough that conversations blend together. Nobody there pays attention to anyone else's business. It's perfect for what we need to do. On the 3rd Friday, we follow Casper to Lucky's and watch through the window as he orders a beer and sits at the bar. We wait in the car until he's on his 3rd drink and starting to relax. His shoulders drop and he's laughing at something the bartender says. That's when we walk in and slide into the booth directly across from where he's sitting. Casper glances over at us, and his expression goes from casual to confused. He stares at Cian and then at me like he's trying to figure out where he knows us from. Then recognition hits and his face goes white. He stands up fast and his bar stool scrapes against the floor. I lean forward and tell him to sit back down, that we just want to talk about what happened to our mother. My voice is calm but firm, and I can see Casper calculating whether he should run for the exit or hear us out. He sits back down slowly, and his hands are shaking as he picks up his beer. Cian pulls out his phone and opens the security footage from Mom's attack. He holds it up so Casper can see the screen and zooms in on the moment when Casper's mask slips and his face is visible for just a second. Casper's eyes go wide and he stammers that he doesn't know what we're talking about, that he's never seen that video before, but sweat is forming on his forehead and his leg is bouncing under the table. Cian zooms in on Jason's tattoo next and then back to Casper's face. I lean in close and tell Casper we know everything, that Dad already told us he hired Casper and Jason, that Jason admitted to being there. Casper's mouth opens like he wants to deny it, but no words come out. His face crumbles and he looks down at his beer like he's going to cry. Then he starts talking fast, words spilling out in a rush. He says Dad told him Mom stole money during their separation, that she was keeping Dad away from his sons, that she deserved to be taught a lesson about respect. The recorder in my pocket is running and catching every single word. Casper says he didn't want to hurt Mom that badly, that the plan was just to scare her, but Jason got carried away with the beating and wouldn't stop. He's making excuses and trying to shift blame, but he's still confessing to being there and participating. I ask him why he did it and Casper's voice breaks. He says Dad promised him $15,000, enough to catch up on child support and keep his ex-wife from taking his daughter away for good. He says he was desperate and Dad made it sound like Mom was a terrible person who had destroyed their family. My hands clench into fists under the table, but I force my voice to stay calm. I ask more questions about the planning, about when they broke in, about what Dad specifically told them to do. Casper keeps answering because he thinks we already know everything, and that cooperating might help him somehow. Cian asks when Dad paid him the money, and Casper says half up front and half after it was done. He pulls out his phone to show us his bank account, as proof that he's telling the truth. His hands are shaking so badly he almost drops the phone, but he manages to pull up his transaction history. I take photos of his screen showing 2 cash deposits of $7,500 each. One is dated 5 days before Mom's attack, and one is dated 3 days after. It's perfect evidence that ties the payment directly to the timeline of what happened. Casper starts crying and saying he's sorry over and over. He says he needed the money so badly, that his daughter was going to be taken away, that Dad made Mom sound like she had ruined his life and deserved what happened. He begs us not to go to the cops because he'll lose his job and his kid and everything he's worked for. I feel absolutely zero sympathy for him because Mom could have died from the beating he gave her. Kian leans forward and his voice drops to something cold and final. He tells Casper he has two choices: turn himself into the cops within 24 hours and confess everything, or we take the recording and all the evidence straight to the police ourselves. Casper's face goes white, and he starts shaking his head fast, saying he can't go to jail. His daughter needs him. His ex-wife will never let him see her again if he gets arrested. He's begging now, asking if there's anything else he can do, any other way to make this right. I stand up and look down at him, telling him he has until tomorrow night to decide, and if he runs, we'll hunt him down and make sure he never sees his kid again anyway. We walk out of the bar without looking back, leaving Casper sitting there with his hands covering his face. In the parking lot, Cian and I stand by my car, arguing in harsh whispers. I think we should go straight to the cops right now with what we have because giving Casper time is stupid. He's obviously going to run. Cian disagrees and says we need to give him the chance to do the right thing, that it'll look better in court if he turns himself in voluntarily. I tell Kian that Casper is a coward who beat up our mom for money. He's not going to suddenly grow a conscience. We go back and forth for 10 minutes until we compromise. We'll watch Casper's apartment tonight to make sure he doesn't disappear, and if he's still there tomorrow, we'll give him until the deadline. We drive to Casper's building and park where we can see his truck and his window. The lights in his apartment stay on until past 2 a.m., and we take turns keeping watch. Around 3 a.m., the lights finally go off and we both try to sleep in the car, one of us always keeping an eye on his truck. The next morning at 6 a.m., Casper's truck is still in the parking lot, and I start to think maybe Kian was right. Maybe Casper will actually turn himself in. We watch him leave for work at 7:30 a.m. in his delivery uniform like it's a normal day. Cian says we should tail him to make sure he actually goes to work and doesn't head for the highway instead. We follow his truck to the distribution center and watch him park and walk inside. I tell Kian we should go home and get some sleep. Come back tonight to see if Casper keeps his word. We head to Cian's place and crash for a few hours, but I can't really sleep because my mind keeps replaying Casper's confession and wondering if we're making a huge mistake. Around noon, Cian's phone rings and wakes us both up. It's a number we don't recognize, but Cian answers it anyway, putting it on speaker. The voice on the other end asks if we're looking for Casper and my stomach drops. It's one of his co-workers from the distribution center saying Casper called in sick this morning and asked him to tell us if we came by. The co-worker sounds confused about why Casper would want him to pass a message to us, but we thank him and hang up fast. Kian and I look at each other and we both know what this means. Casper ran. We jump in the car and speed back to his apartment building. His truck is gone from the parking spot, and when we go up to his door and knock, nobody answers. I kick the door in frustration, and Cian pulls out his phone to call the distribution center back, pretending to be Casper's friend asking if anyone knows where he might be. The person on the phone says Casper just called in sick for one day, not like he quit or anything, so he's probably still in town somewhere. We spend the entire day driving around to every place we think Casper might go. First we check his ex-wife's house, but her car is there and Casper's truck isn't, so we don't knock because we don't want to scare her. Then we drive to Dad's house and circle the block 3 times, but there's no sign of Casper's truck. We try Jason's apartment next and sit outside for an hour watching, but Casper never shows up. By 6 p.m. we're running out of ideas, and I'm getting more and more angry that we let him slip away. Kian suggests checking cheap motels near the highway, because that's where someone would hide if they were planning to run, but hadn't left yet. We start at the north end of town and work our way south, checking parking lots at every rundown motel we pass. Finally, at 8 p.m., we spot Casper's truck parked outside a place called the Highway Rest Motel, one of those sketchy spots that rents rooms by the hour. Cian wants to go knock on doors until we find which room he's in, confront him again, and force him to come with us to the police. I'm done playing games, though, and I pull out my phone to call Mom. She answers on the second ring, and I can hear the TV in the background. I tell her we found the guys who hurt her, that we have evidence and a recording of one of them confessing, and that we're going to the police tonight to turn everything over. Mom starts crying immediately, but it's different from before. It's relief and fear mixed together. She begs us to be careful, to let the legal system handle it from here, to please not do anything that will get us in trouble or hurt. She keeps saying she can't lose us too, that she needs us safe more than she needs revenge. I promise her we'll do this the right way, that we're going straight to the police station right now, even though part of me still wants to drag Casper out of that motel room and make him pay personally for what he did. We drive to the police station and walk up to the front desk. I ask to speak with Detective Scott, who handled Mom's case originally, and the officer at the desk looks surprised but calls her. 20 minutes later, Detective Scott comes out to the lobby, and she looks older than I remember, more tired. She recognizes us immediately, and her expression is cautious as she leads us back to an interview room. The room is small, with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs, and there's a camera in the corner with a red light on. Cian and I sit down and start laying out everything we found over the past 13 months. We show her the photos we took of Jason, the screenshots of Casper's bank deposits, the recording of Casper's confession at the bar. We tell her about Dad's secret son, about Jason's new car and paid-off mortgage, about following them and tracking their movements. We explain how we connected Jason's tattoo from the security footage to Dad's friend, how we found Casper through Dad's confession, how all the pieces fit together into a clear picture of conspiracy. Detective Scott sits with her arms crossed the entire time, and her expression gets harder and harder as we talk. When we finally finish, she's quiet for a long moment, and then she tells us we've conducted an illegal investigation. She says the recording might not be allowed in court because of consent laws, that we've potentially messed up the entire case by confronting suspects and threatening them. She asks if we assaulted anyone, if we made any threats, if we broke any laws during our investigation. My heart is sinking because we thought we were helping Mom get justice, but maybe we just made everything worse. I admit that we confronted Jason and Dad at Dad's house, that we might have scared them, but we didn't actually hurt anyone. Cian adds that we only followed people in public places and took photos that anyone could have taken. Detective Scott sighs and pulls out a notepad, telling us we need to write detailed statements about every single step of our investigation. She wants to know every person we followed, every piece of evidence we gathered, every conversation we had, every place we went. She says she needs to know exactly what we did, so she can figure out what parts of the case are still good and what parts we ruined. The process takes 4 hours and my hand is cramping from writing by the end. We fill out page after page describing our surveillance of Jason, our tracking of Casper, our confrontation at Dad's house, our recording at the bar. Every time we think we're done, Detective Scott asks another question that requires 3 more paragraphs. By the time we finish, it's past midnight, and I'm exhausted and terrified that we're about to be arrested for stalking or harassment or something worse. Detective Scott collects all our statements and tells us she needs to talk with the district attorney about how to move forward. She says they'll be in touch and that we should not contact any of the suspects or do any more investigating on our own. We drive home in silence, and I can't tell if we just saved Mom's case or destroyed it completely. 2 days later, Detective Scott calls my phone and asks us to come back to the station. She suggests we bring a lawyer if we have one, and the tone of her voice makes it clear this isn't optional. It's more like a command. Cian and I are terrified because we think we're about to be arrested for everything we did. We don't have a lawyer and can't afford one, so we just show up at the station the next morning trying not to panic. Detective Scott meets us in the lobby again, but this time there's someone with her. A young guy in a suit who looks maybe 30 years old. She introduces him as Ada Kramer from the district attorney's office, and he shakes our hands with a firm grip. We follow them back to a conference room that's bigger than the interview room, with a long table and actual comfortable chairs. Ada Kramer sits down across from us and doesn't waste time with small talk. He tells us straight up that we created a huge mess by investigating on our own, that we could have destroyed the case against the people who hurt our mom. But then his expression shifts slightly, and he says that despite our methods being questionable, the evidence we gathered points to a clear conspiracy to commit assault. He's looked at the bank records, the photos, the security footage with Jason's tattoo, and even though the recording might not be allowed in court, everything else builds a solid case. He says if we cooperate fully going forward and stop doing anything on our own, he's willing to work with us to prosecute Dad, Casper, and Jason for what they did to Mom. Kramer pulled out a folder and spread photos across the table, pointing to the bank deposits we'd documented. He said the financial records were solid evidence because they showed a clear pattern of payments right before and after the attack. The photos of Casper and Jason together gave context to their relationship. But then he tapped the recording device we'd used at the bar, and his expression got serious. He explained that depending on state law, recording someone without their knowledge might not be allowed in court. The defense could argue it was obtained illegally and get it thrown out completely. My stomach dropped because that recording had Casper admitting everything. Kramer must have seen my face because he quickly added that even without the recording, the case was strong enough to move forward. He planned to bring Jason in for questioning within the next few hours and offer him a deal. If Jason agreed to testify against Dad and Casper, he'd get reduced charges or maybe just probation. Cian asked why we'd let Jason off easy, and Kramer said it was about building the strongest case possible. With Jason's testimony, they could prove Dad orchestrated the whole thing. Without it, Dad could claim he knew nothing, and Casper acted alone. Detective Scott nodded and said this was standard procedure in conspiracy cases. You flip the weakest link to get the bigger fish. I hated it but understood the logic. That same afternoon, Detective Scott and 2 other officers drove to the motel where we tracked Casper. Kramer let us wait at the station and watch through the window overlooking the parking lot when they brought suspects in. We sat there for 2 hours drinking bad coffee and barely talking. Finally, a police car pulled up, and I saw Casper in the back seat. The officers opened the door and Casper bolted the second his feet hit pavement. He sprinted toward the street, but Detective Scott had positioned the 3rd officer there. They tackled him hard onto the asphalt and cuffed him while he yelled about police harassment. Watching them walk him past the window in handcuffs should have felt satisfying. We'd spent 13 months tracking this guy. We'd confronted him, recorded him, and now he was finally caught. But instead I felt empty. This wasn't the justice we originally wanted. We wanted to make him hurt the way he hurt Mom. We wanted him to feel scared and broken. Instead, he was just getting arrested and processed like any other criminal. Cian must have felt the same because he stared at the floor instead of watching Casper get brought inside. The whole thing felt too clean, too official, too far from the raw justice we'd imagined. Casper's lawyer showed up 3 hours later, some guy in an expensive suit who looked annoyed to be there. Kramer told us through the glass that Casper was invoking his right to remain silent on his lawyer's advice. This was completely normal and expected. Casper would sit in a holding cell until his arraignment hearing, probably in a day or two. Then they brought Dad in for questioning. We couldn't hear what was happening, but we watched through the one-way glass as Dad sat across from Detective Scott looking small and scared. His lawyer arrived within 20 minutes and immediately shut down the questioning. Dad didn't say a single word. Then Jason came in separately with his own lawyer. Same result. Everyone lawyered up and refused to talk. Kramer said this was actually good for the prosecution because it meant they were scared and defensive. Innocent people usually wanted to explain themselves. Guilty people hid behind lawyers. Still, watching all 3 of them walk out of questioning without giving statements made me feel like we'd accomplished nothing. We had evidence and recordings and photos, but they were all just going to sit there silently and let their lawyers do the talking. The next week crawled by slower than any week of my life. Every morning I woke up expecting news and got nothing. Every afternoon I checked my phone hoping Kramer would call with updates. Cian and I tried to train at the gym, but our hearts weren't in it. We'd go through the motions of sparring and hitting bags, but the whole time we were thinking about the case. Mom called us every day asking if we'd heard anything. On Wednesday, she went to court with Detective Scott and got a protection order against Dad, Casper, and Jason. The order said none of them could contact her, come near her house, or be within 500 feet of her. Lila Rose from the hospital met with Mom that same day to explain court procedures. She walked Mom through what an arraignment was, what a preliminary hearing meant, what to expect if the case went to trial. Mom called me after that meeting sounding overwhelmed. She said there were so many steps and so much waiting. Lila told her these cases could take months or even years to fully resolve. I tried to sound encouraging, but honestly, I was just as frustrated as she was. Friday afternoon, my phone finally rang with Kramer's number. He said Jason's lawyer had reached out about a cooperation deal. Jason was willing to testify that Dad paid him and Casper to assault Mom. He'd say Dad planned everything as revenge for the cheating accusations from 5 years ago. Jason would explain how Dad contacted him, how much money was offered, how they planned the break-in to look random. In exchange, Jason wanted his charges reduced from assault to accessory, and he wanted no jail time. Just probation and community service. I felt my jaw clench as Kramer explained this. Jason had helped beat Mom until her face was unrecognizable, and he wanted to walk free. Kramer said the deal was contingent on Jason's testimony being truthful and complete. If he lied or held anything back, the deal was off and he'd face full charges. He asked what Cian and I thought about accepting the deal. I told him I needed to talk to Cian and call him back. 2 days later, Cian and I sat in Kramer's office discussing the deal. I said I hated everything about it. Jason should go to prison for what he did. Kramer leaned back in his chair and said he understood our feelings, but we needed to think strategically. Without Jason's testimony, the case against Dad was much weaker. Dad's lawyer would argue that Dad was just venting to his son about his ex-wife. They'd say Casper took it upon himself to act, and Dad had no knowledge of the attack. Casper would probably claim the same thing, that he misunderstood or acted alone. The bank deposits could be explained as legitimate family support. The security footage showed Casper and Jason, but not Dad. Jason's testimony was the link that connected everything. He could testify that Dad explicitly hired them, that Dad gave specific instructions, that Dad paid them afterward. With Jason's testimony, the conspiracy case was solid. Without it, the case was shaky. Cian asked what happened if we said no to the deal. Kramer said they'd prosecute Jason too, but all 3 defendants would probably get lighter sentences because the evidence was weaker. Or worse, Dad might get acquitted completely. We agreed to the deal even though it made us sick. Getting Dad convicted mattered more than punishing Jason. Mom was harder to convince when we told her. She cried and said Jason hurt her just as much as Casper did. Why should he walk free while Casper went to jail? I explained what Kramer said about the testimony being crucial. She asked if we trusted Jason to tell the truth. I said the deal required him to be completely honest, or he'd face full charges. After an hour of talking, she finally accepted it. She said she wanted Dad to pay for what he did more than anything. If letting Jason off was the price, she'd agree to it. 2 weeks later, Jason appeared in court and pleaded guilty to accessory to assault. He stood there looking at the floor while the judge explained his sentence. 2 years probation, 300 hours community service, and restitution payments to Mom for her medical bills. He agreed to testify fully and truthfully at Dad's and Casper's trials. Walking out of that courthouse knowing Jason was free made my hands shake with anger. 3 weeks after the arrests, Dad's arraignment finally happened. Kian and I sat in the courtroom watching Dad stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. The judge read the charges out loud. Conspiracy to commit assault. Dad's lawyer immediately entered a not guilty plea. Then the lawyer started arguing that Dad was just a father venting frustrations to his son. He said there was no evidence Dad explicitly ordered an attack. The payments to Casper were normal family support. Dad never intended anyone to get hurt. It was all Casper's misunderstanding and Jason's involvement. The prosecutor pushed back hard, citing Jason's cooperation agreement and upcoming testimony. The judge listened to both sides, then set bail at $50,000. I thought maybe Dad would have to stay in jail. But his lawyer pulled out a credit card right there in the courtroom and posted bail within an hour. Dad walked out a free man until trial. Watching him leave the courthouse in regular clothes, no handcuffs, no orange jumpsuit, made me want to scream. Casper's arraignment happened separately the next week. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea and immediately started attacking the evidence. He argued the security footage was too grainy to positively identify Casper. He said the bank deposits proved nothing, because Dad could have been giving his son legitimate financial help. He claimed Casper was at work when the assault happened, and had witnesses to prove it. Kramer stood up and methodically destroyed each argument. He had the bank deposits timed exactly with the attack. He had Jason's testimony placing Casper at the scene. He had the security footage showing Casper's face when his mask slipped. The judge wasn't buying the defense's arguments. He set bail at $75,000, higher than Dad's because Casper had actually committed the physical assault. Casper couldn't post bail. He stayed in jail waiting for trial. The preliminary hearings dragged on for 2 months with constant continuances and motions. Every time we thought we were making progress, some lawyer would file a motion to suppress evidence or request more time. Kian and I attended every single court date. We sat in the gallery behind Mom, showing Dad and Casper we weren't backing down. We wanted them to see us every time they walked into that courtroom. The stress started wearing on all of us. Mom stopped sleeping well and started taking medication for anxiety. Cian got short-tempered at the gym and snapped at people during training. I started having trouble sleeping because every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the confrontation at Dad's house. I kept thinking about how close we came to doing something we couldn't take back. How we almost became criminals ourselves trying to get justice. The legal system moved so slowly it felt like torture, but at least it was moving forward. At least Dad and Casper would eventually face real consequences. That had to be enough. One afternoon after a hearing, Detective Scott pulled Cian and me into a side hallway away from the crowd. Her face looked serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. She told us Dad's lawyer was building a case that we had harassed and threatened his clients. She said they had statements from Dad and Jason about the confrontation at Dad's house, and they were claiming we forced confessions through violence. Detective Scott looked us straight in the eyes and said we needed to stay away from Dad, Casper, and Jason completely, or we could face charges ourselves. The warning felt so unfair because we were the victim's family, but she made it clear she was trying to protect us. We agreed to keep our distance even though every part of me wanted to show up at every court date and stare them down. Kian nodded and promised we'd stay away, and Detective Scott seemed relieved but still worried. She walked away and left us standing in that hallway feeling like somehow we were the ones in trouble. The next week my phone rang while I was at work, and Stanley Bailey's name popped up on the screen. My hands got sweaty because Stanley never called unless something was wrong at the gym. I answered and he asked me to come in for a conversation about the case. His voice sounded different, not angry but disappointed, and that made it worse. I drove to the gym after my shift ended and found Stanley in his office with the door closed. He gestured for me to sit down and asked directly if Kian and I had done anything illegal during our investigation. I could have lied, but Stanley had been our coach for 12 years, and he deserved the truth. I told him about following Jason and Casper, about the confrontation at Dad's house, about everything we did before going to the police. Stanley listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he just shook his head slowly. He looked disappointed but not surprised, like he'd suspected we'd crossed lines but hoped we hadn't. Stanley leaned back in his chair and said he'd support us as character witnesses if the court needed that, but the gym had to distance itself publicly from any vigilante activity. He reminded me that MMA training was supposed to teach discipline and control, not encourage people to take justice into their own hands. His words stung because he was right that we'd lost control. He said the gym's reputation depended on students using their skills responsibly, and he couldn't have people thinking he trained vigilantes. I understood what he meant, but it still hurt to hear him say the gym had to distance itself from us. Stanley told me I could keep training there, but I needed to be an example of doing things the right way from now on. I left his office feeling smaller than I had in years, like I'd let down someone who mattered. 4 months crawled by with more court dates and legal paperwork than I could keep track of. Then Kramer called and said Casper's lawyer had approached him about a plea deal. Casper was willing to plead guilty to aggravated assault in exchange for a recommended sentence of 5 years with possibility of parole. Kramer said he wanted to meet with us and Mom to get our input before responding to the offer. We drove to his office downtown and sat in a conference room with harsh fluorescent lights. Kramer laid out the details of the plea deal and explained that if Casper went to trial, he might get more time, but there was also a chance a jury could give him less. He said plea deals gave certainty, but often felt unsatisfying because the sentences seemed too light. Mom sat quietly while Kramer talked, and I could see her hands shaking slightly in her lap. When Kramer finished explaining everything, Mom surprised both Kian and me by saying she wanted to accept the plea. She said she was tired from the court process and didn't want to go through a trial where she had to testify and relive the attack in front of strangers. Her voice cracked when she talked about having to describe the beating in detail while Casper sat there watching. Cian and I were torn because 5 years felt too light for what Casper did to her. I thought about Mom's face in the hospital, purple and swollen, and 5 years seemed like nothing. But Mom kept saying she just wanted it over, that she needed to move on with her life and stop reliving that night. Kian looked at me, and I could see the same struggle in his eyes, wanting justice, but also wanting Mom to have peace. We told Kramer we'd defer to Mom's wishes since she was the victim and had to live with the outcome. Dad's trial got scheduled for 2 months after Casper's plea deal, because Dad was refusing everything and insisting on his innocence. Kramer told us Dad's strategy was to claim that Casper and Jason acted independently, and that any money he gave Casper was for legitimate family support. Dad's lawyer was going to argue that Dad had no idea what Casper and Jason were planning and was shocked when he found out. Kramer seemed confident the jury would see through the lies because the bank deposits were timed exactly with the attack, and Jason was going to testify that Dad orchestrated everything. The trial date appeared on our calendars like a countdown to something we'd been waiting for since the night we found Mom in the hospital. The week before Dad's trial was supposed to start, Kramer called with news that Dad's lawyer had contacted him with a last-minute plea offer. Dad would plead guilty to conspiracy to commit assault in exchange for 3 years in prison. I felt anger rise up in my chest, because 3 years was even less than Casper was getting, and Dad was the one who planned everything. Kramer said he'd already pushed back and demanded 5 years to match Casper's sentence. He said the negotiation went back and forth for hours, and they finally settled on 4 years. Kramer asked if we wanted him to reject the offer and go to trial anyway, but he warned that trials were unpredictable, and Dad might end up with less time if a jury felt sympathetic. Mom accepted Dad's plea deal with visible relief spreading across her face. She told us she just wanted this over so she could move on with her life and stop thinking about court dates and lawyers. Cian and I sat on her couch struggling with the outcome because 4 years felt so inadequate for planning an attack that could have killed her. I kept thinking about how Dad paid his own son to beat his ex-wife, how he orchestrated everything out of spite and wounded pride. 4 years seemed like nothing compared to the lifetime of trauma Mom would carry. But Mom kept saying she was done, that she couldn't handle more court appearances and more lawyers arguing about her life. We respected her decision, even though it felt wrong in our guts. Jason's sentencing hearing happened first since he cooperated with the prosecution. Kian and I sat in the courtroom with Mom and watched Jason stand before the judge in a suit that looked too big for him. The judge gave him 2 years probation, community service, and ordered him to pay restitution to Mom for her medical bills. Jason walked out of the courthouse a free man, and I watched him get into his car and drive away like nothing had happened. My hands clenched into fists, and I felt that familiar rage building in my chest. Kramer met us outside and reminded us that Jason's testimony was crucial for getting convictions against Dad and Casper. He said sometimes the justice system requires uncomfortable compromises to catch the bigger fish. I understood the logic, but it didn't make watching Jason walk free any easier. Casper's sentencing 2 weeks later was emotional in a way I didn't expect. His daughter was in the courtroom crying, maybe 10 years old, and I could see Casper trying not to look at her. The judge lectured Casper about betraying his own family and using financial problems as an excuse for violence. He said Casper had choices, and he chose to brutally assault an innocent woman for money. The judge gave him 5 years in state prison with parole eligibility after 3 and ordered him to pay restitution jointly with Jason. Casper's daughter sobbed louder when the bailiff led him away in handcuffs. Part of me felt satisfied seeing him taken to prison, but another part felt sick watching his kid lose her father. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, and I knew she was thinking about how this whole mess had destroyed multiple families, not just ours. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courtroom for Dad's sentencing, and my stomach was twisted in knots. Dad stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I remembered, his hands cuffed in front of him. The judge asked if he wanted to make a statement, and Dad nodded. He started talking about how he never meant for Mom to get hurt that badly, that he just wanted to scare her into admitting the truth about the cheating that never happened. He said he was sorry for everything, and that he'd made terrible choices driven by anger and pain. His voice cracked when he talked about losing his sons and his family. The judge's face stayed hard the whole time Dad spoke. When Dad finished, the judge leaned forward and said Dad's actions were calculated and cruel, that he'd planned and paid for a brutal assault on an innocent woman. The judge said Dad showed no real remorse until he got caught, and that his apology meant nothing compared to the trauma he caused. 4 years in state prison with no possibility of early parole. The bailiff led Dad away in handcuffs, and he looked back at us one time with tears on his face. Mom started shaking next to me, and then the tears came. We walked out to the hallway, and she just collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Cian and I held her while she cried and kept saying she never thought it would end like this, that she never wanted Dad to go to prison, that everything was so messed up. We got her to the car and drove her home. The whole ride, she stared out the window, not saying anything. At her house, we ordered Chinese food and put on her favorite romantic comedy. She barely touched the food, but she laughed a few times at the movie. We stayed until midnight making sure she was okay and didn't want to be alone. A week later, my phone rang while I was at Cian's apartment. Detective Scott's name showed on the screen and my heart started racing. She said the DA's office reviewed everything about our investigation and decided not to file charges against us. They considered the case closed with all 3 attackers convicted and didn't want to punish the victim's family for seeking justice on their own. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. I called Cian immediately and he actually yelled with happiness. We'd been worried for months that we'd end up in legal trouble for confronting Jason and Dad, for following people and recording Casper without permission. 2 days after that call, an envelope arrived with the DA's office return address. Inside was a letter from Kramer thanking us for our cooperation throughout the prosecution. He wrote that our methods were unorthodox and he couldn't officially approve a vigilante investigation, but our evidence was crucial to securing all 3 convictions. He included pamphlets about victim services and counseling resources for trauma survivors. He also wrote that he hoped our family could find peace and healing now that justice had been served. The letter felt like closure even though it was just a piece of paper. Cian and I drove to the gym to talk with Stanley about coming back to training. We hadn't been there regularly in 6 months because of court dates and meetings with lawyers. Stanley met us in his office and looked us over like he was checking for injuries. He said we looked terrible, out of shape, and exhausted. I admitted we'd let training slide while dealing with everything. Stanley said he understood, but that if we wanted to come back, we had to attend anger management classes first. He said the gym couldn't have members who might lose control and hurt someone because they hadn't dealt with their rage issues. Kian started to argue, but I stopped him because Stanley was right. We'd almost destroyed our own lives chasing revenge, and we needed help processing that. The first anger management class was weird, because everyone else there was way older than us. The counselor was a woman in her 50s who asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. Cian and I took turns telling the story about Mom's attack and our investigation. The other people in the group looked shocked, and a few seemed impressed that we'd tracked down the attackers ourselves. The counselor didn't look impressed at all. She spent the next hour talking about how rage can feel righteous and justified, but it destroys the person feeling it just as much as the target. She said revenge and justice aren't the same thing, even though they can look similar from the outside. Over the next few weeks, she got us talking about how the anger drove every decision we made for 13 months. She made us see how we'd almost thrown away our futures and hurt innocent people in our quest to make Dad and his friends pay. The sessions were uncomfortable, but slowly something started shifting in how I thought about everything that happened. Mom started seeing a therapist who worked with crime victims and trauma survivors. She told us the nightmares were happening less often, but she still woke up scared sometimes. She was having trouble being in her house alone, especially at night. Kian and I spent a weekend installing new deadbolts on every door and adding cameras to cover blind spots the old system missed. We put motion sensor lights all around the outside of the house, so nothing could move near her windows without triggering bright lights. Mom watched us work and said she felt safer already just knowing we were making her house more secure. 3 months after all the sentencings, Mom called and asked us to come over. She had real estate listings spread across her kitchen table. She said she'd been thinking about moving to a different neighborhood because the current house held too many bad memories. Every room reminded her of that night, and she wanted a fresh start somewhere new. Kian and I spent the next 2 weeks driving her around to look at houses. She wanted something smaller, easier to maintain, with good security features already in place. We found a place near our gym that had reinforced doors and a good alarm system. The neighborhood was quiet with lots of families and people walking dogs. Mom's face lit up when we walked through it, and she said it felt right. The moving process took 3 weeks and all of us worked together packing up the old house. Kian and I made sure Mom's new place had locks on every window and reinforced frames on the doors. We installed cameras covering every angle and set up the alarm system to call our phones if it triggered. Mom joked that her house was more secure than a bank vault now, but we could see the relief in her eyes when she locked the doors at night. Lila Rose from the hospital called Mom regularly to check on her recovery. She connected Mom with a support group for assault survivors that met twice a month at a community center. Mom was nervous about going at first and said she didn't want to sit around talking about being a victim. Lila convinced her to try one meeting. After that first meeting, Mom came home and said it actually helped to talk with people who understood what she'd been through. She started going regularly and made friends with other women who were working through their own trauma. She told us the group made her feel less alone and gave her hope that she could heal and move forward with her life. 6 months after the trials ended, Kian and I walked into our last anger management session. The counselor sat across from us with 2 manila folders on her desk. She opened them and pulled out letters she'd written for our records, stating we'd successfully completed the program and developed healthy ways to handle our anger. We signed some paperwork, and she handed us the letters in sealed envelopes. Stanley was waiting for us at the gym when we showed up that afternoon. We gave him the letters and he read them carefully, nodding as he went through each page. He walked to his office and came back with 2 cheap frames from the dollar store. He put our letters in the frames and hung them on the wall behind his desk, right next to his black belt certificates and competition photos. He tapped the frames and said they'd remind everyone that being strong meant controlling your emotions, not just your fists. We started training seriously again the next week. The discipline felt good after months of court dates and stress. Our sparring sessions were different now because we were more aware of the damage we could do. Every time I threw a punch at Cian, I thought about the responsibility that came with 13 years of training. He moved the same way, more controlled and precise instead of just trying to land hits. Stanley pushed us harder than he ever had before, making us do extra rounds and more technical drills. He was channeling our intensity into technique rather than letting us fight angry. One Saturday morning, Mom showed up at the gym. We were in the middle of a sparring round when I saw her walk in and sit on the bench near the door. It was the first time she'd seen us spar since before the attack happened. Cian and I worked through our combinations, blocking and countering with the precision Stanley had been drilling into us for weeks. When the round ended, I looked over and saw Mom wiping tears from her face. She walked over and hugged both of us, not caring that we were sweaty and gross. She told us she was proud of how we'd handled everything, even though the path had been messy and painful. That meant more to us than any championship belt ever could. A year after Dad got sentenced, Mom called me at work. She sounded stressed and said she needed to talk to Cian and me about something. We met at her house that evening and she showed us a letter that had arrived in the mail. The return address was the state prison where Dad was locked up. The envelope was still sealed and Mom said she didn't know if she should open it or throw it away. Kian picked up the envelope and looked at it for a long time. I told Mom it was completely her choice, that she didn't owe Dad anything including reading whatever he wanted to say. She took the envelope from Cian, walked to the kitchen and dropped it in the trash without opening it. She came back and said she was done with that chapter of her life. A few weeks later, Mom got a phone call from a victim advocate. The advocate explained that Casper's ex-wife wanted to apologize for what Casper had done. She had no idea Casper was planning to attack anyone, and she was horrified when she found out. The advocate asked if Mom would be willing to accept the letter. Mom agreed, and the letter arrived a few days later. Casper's ex-wife wrote that she was sorry for the pain Casper caused, and that she hoped Mom could heal. She said she held no anger toward Mom, and wanted her to know that Casper's daughter didn't know anything about the attack either. Mom sat at her kitchen table and wrote a response letter. She told Casper's ex-wife that she appreciated the apology, and that she held no bad feelings toward her or Casper's daughter. She mailed it the next day, and said it felt good to let go of some of the anger. Cian got a call from the director of a youth MMA program across town. They needed a new coach, and Stanley had recommended him. Cian went to check out the program and came back excited about the opportunity. He accepted the position and started coaching kids twice a week. I went to watch one of his sessions and he was amazing with them. He taught them proper stance and basic combinations, but he also talked about respect and discipline. He told them that learning to fight meant learning when not to fight. Watching him work with those kids showed me how much we'd both grown from everything that happened. Around the same time, I started volunteering with a victim advocacy organization downtown. They helped families navigate the criminal justice system when someone they loved got hurt. My experience investigating Mom's case and going through the trials gave me knowledge that could help other families. I met with people who were confused about court procedures or scared about testifying. I explained what they could expect and connected them with resources. It felt good to turn our painful journey into something useful for others. On the anniversary of Mom's attack, the 3 of us had dinner at her new house. Mom cooked her famous lasagna, and we sat around her kitchen table talking about how far we'd come in a year. Mom said she was finally sleeping through the night without nightmares. Cian talked about how coaching the kids gave him purpose beyond just training. I shared stories about the families I'd helped through the victim advocacy program. We didn't get perfect justice because Dad would be out in 4 years and Casper in 3, but we got accountability and safety and the chance to heal together as a family. Life wasn't back to normal because normal didn't exist anymore after what happened. We built something different though, something better. A family that fought through darkness and made the choice to move forward with honesty and strength.